While Napoleon was campaigning in Egypt, one of the things he had done was to keep an eye on the political events going on in France. Earlier in his life, he had become enamored with politics and had begun to work on making sure that his own name and reputation would be elevated within French political circles. He had learned that France suffered a number of defeats militarily, and as such there was a great deal of threat towards the government. And so Napoleon would set sail to return to France on August 24th, 1799. The voyage across the Mediterranean would have his arrival occur in October of that year, and the situation within the country had improved greatly, as the military was able to score a number of victories for France, and thus help secure the position of the government. And yet, the very same government for which Napoleon was a hero too, the Directory, found itself now distrusting him. In fact, the government would even go so far as to want to put him on trial for deserting his post in his army in Egypt, even though orders had been sent for his return to the nation in order to help protect them from outside invasion. Now, even though the government could not punish Napoleon for his quote-unquote desertion, the people of France hailed his arrival as that of a conquering hero. And upon it being in the nation and in Paris as a whole, Napoleon quickly learned that the government was broke and exceedingly unpopular. Finding allies within the legislature, Napoleon would overthrow the government on November the 9th, 1799, and he would begin to establish the Constitution of Year 8, which would name him the first consul of France for 10 years, preserve the Republic, and establish a strong government. However, the truth of it was that the new constitution that Napoleon was helping to draft really was the foundations of a dictatorship. Now, in order to ensure his political takeover was considered legitimate, Napoleon used the democratic principles of the French Revolution to his advantage by holding elections to solidify his position. In January of 1800, Napoleon claimed 99% of the electorate came out to vote and overwhelmingly passed the Constitution of Year 8 and established him as the first consul. Now, historians argue that the claim that 3 million voters would show up to the polls and vote in favor of Napoleon and the government seems a little too inflated. They argue that the numbers were probably closer to 1.5 million. But in a day and age where 24/7 media did not exist, and being able to verify the truth of the stories was rather difficult to do, the 3 million number sounds much more impressive. And the truth was, very few people ever wanted to vote against that which was considered popular. And so the truth might be found somewhere in the middle. Now, even with the electoral win, Napoleon's hold on power was not very strong. The people of France, due to constant warfare, were rather distrustful of their political leaders, and as such, Napoleon needed to have quick, swift, decisive action to ensure that his hold on power would remain firm. In order to do so, Napoleon would come to the head of the army and lead it across the Swiss Alps into Italy, whereupon Napoleon would march against the Austrians, who had returned into northern Italy. Marching into the Italian countryside unopposed, Napoleon was able to outflank the Austrians, and on June 14, 1800, defeated them at the Battle of Marengo by holding his lines and wearing down his opponents. The timely arrival of reinforcements allowed him to continuously bash the Austrians into submission, eventually breaking their lines and capturing a rather sizable portion of their men. The subsequent treaty that would follow was aided with another French victory at the Battle of Hohenlinden in Bavaria in December of 1800. The end result of the treaty was the Austrians would have to evacuate from Italy, and the French were able to take full control of that area and begin to recenter its government with French ideals. Napoleon's success would continue to go even further as, in March of 1802, the British and the French would sign the Treaty of Amiens, ending the Revolutionary Wars and bringing peace to the continent after nearly 10 years of bloody fighting. Now, Napoleon took advantage of the peace treaty to ratify a new constitution, which elevated his role as first consul from a 10-year position to a lifetime position. It's also rather unique to note that following this peace treaty and the passage of the Constitution, Napoleon Bonaparte would only be referred to as Napoleon from this point forward. Now, with peace established, Napoleon looked to the French colonies to reassert control over them. And one of the areas in which Napoleon really had his eye on was the Caribbean. The French colony of Saint-Dominique was one of the biggest cash cows that the French Empire had. In fact, it was far more successful than all the British Caribbean holdings combined. However, one of the major changes that occurred due to the revolutionary governments was that in 1794, slavery had been abolished. For Napoleon, this was not something he wanted to have continue, and so he sought to reestablish slavery within the French possessions. Not to be surprised, but for those freed enslaved individuals who were living in the Caribbean, being told that they were going to go back into slavery was not exactly something they were looking forward to. It was at this time that we saw the rise of Toussaint Louverture in Saint-Dominique, who would lead an enslaved rebellion against the French. Napoleon would send 2 expeditionary forces into the colony in an attempt to put down the rebellion, and yet it was unsuccessful. For while the enslaved rebels were able to fight numerous battles and have numerous victories over the French army, one of the greatest allies they had was that of disease, as many French soldiers became ill with malaria and thus decimated their ranks. Realizing that trying to reestablish control over the Caribbean was next to impossible, Napoleon admitted defeat and pulled his men out. No sooner had they left than Saint Dominique would be renamed Haiti and would become a symbol of freedom for those formerly enslaved individuals living in the New World. It was also during this time that the United States would offer to buy what was known as the Louisiana Territory from the French. Now, according to lore, Napoleon famously met with the American ambassadors and even signed the bill of sale while sitting in the bathtub. The agreed-upon price was $15 million, and both sides thought they were getting the better end of the deal. However, as history has shown, it was the United States which got the better end of the deal in the grand scheme of things. Peace in Europe was short-lived, however, as tensions between England and France grew. Neither nation complied with the Treaty of Amiens, and in May of 1803, Britain would declare war on France. Now, in response, Napoleon began to reorganize his army for an invasion of England and made a proclamation that all British males who were living in France at this time would be arrested and be declared prisoners of war. Now, throughout the entire time of Napoleon's return to France, one of the most common and dogging issues he had to deal with was that of assassination. Numerous political factions wanted to get rid of him due to his popularity, and so Napoleon would take advantage of these failed assassination attempts and reestablish the government with more Roman ideals, and effectively, by doing this, consolidating power. And one of the things that would happen is that Napoleon realized that if there's one part of the Roman Empire which worked, it was that instead of having consuls, there was the emperor. And so Napoleon wanted to legitimize the possibility of him becoming emperor of France. But to do so, he had to ensure that all those who could potentially, within the French regime, go against him were on his side. On May 18, 1804, he solidified his influence over the military by creating 18 marshals of France from his generals. And in the following month, Napoleon would put out a vote, asking the French people if they should vote for him to become Emperor of France. And overwhelmingly, they did. One of those individuals found within Napoleon's inner circle, Madame de Rumsat, said that Napoleon was made emperor because people were looking for the domination of an able ruler, and that it was only Napoleon who could save them. On December the 2nd, 1804, Napoleon would crown himself Emperor of France, with Pope Pius VII looking on and presiding over the event at Notre Dame's Cathedral. At the age of 35, Napoleon had successfully gone from being just a lowly noble from a poor family in Corsica to Emperor of France. And as he was emperor and looking over his kingdom, even he knew that what he had wasn't enough, and that he wanted more, and he wanted it now. For more information, please consider these suggested titles. Be sure to click on the left-hand side of the screen to subscribe to our show, and on the right-hand side for our latest episode. And we will see you again for the next episode of Milling Through History.